Welcome to this damp, rainy day in northern Michigan. It should be chilly and snowing with fluffy snow, but the weather decided to turn warmer, which just makes it feel colder because it's damp. I recently had a question regarding backing. A fellow in another place in the world asked me, and it's a very fair question, it's a very good question because backing is of concern to people that want to build composite bows, whether or not artificial sinew would be as good as actual real sinew for backing a Korean replica bow. Now, before I start in that, let's just talk about backing materials or materials in general. This is a roll of B50. Unfortunately, I couldn't find my roll of artificial sinew because I don't use it that much. Occasionally on some bows I'll make a string out of artificial sinew just because it kind of looks like real sinew. But the positive side, it looks more real than the B50. But on the negative side, there's a certain amount of stretch with it. Artificial sinew is not real sinew. And it kind of irks me when I see people selling things that are using artificial sinew and they refer to it as real sinew. It's not. Artificial sinew is nylon. It has a feeling like real sinew, natural sinew, if you make bowstrings out of it, because nylon has stretch. It has bounce. It's able to absorb some energy in its stretching, and when it returns, it puts that energy back. However, it's not that efficient, and so you lose cast. You lose arrow cast if you use artificial sinew strings because it's just stretchy. It's nylon. Next up is B50, which is Dacron, and it's intended for bows, and it's good for a lot of traditional bows and primitive bows because it has some stretch but less than nylon, and that little bit of stretch that B50 would supply would be more gentle on the bows. As you climb the ranks, you get into fast flight, which has less stretch, and it's really recommended that you have reinforced bows and bows created for fast flight because it's more of a shock when the string hits home after drawing and then releasing. Boink! It hits home. I'll refer to it as that way. And fast flight, not having as much stretch, can be harder on bows. And then as you're climbing the ranks, you get into the cables on compound bows, which have very little, if you can consider it even no stretch. So let's digress and go back to artificial sinew. It does mimic real sinew. And if you could back a bow with it, it would probably react somewhat similar to real sinew. However, there are two things you need to consider. First, when you use real sinew, I had to find my hammer. I've got a bunch of hammers all over the place, and this morning I can't find one because I have to pound some of these. Real sinew absorbs the bonding agent. Don't I sound technical? It absorbs the glue, and so you get a good bond. Secondly, if this was a roll of artificial sinew and not B50, and you tried to use it, it wouldn't bond well because it is waxed. And that waxed makes it even harder to glue. It's not permeable, and it's waxed, so it's designed not to stick to stuff, basically. And so that limits the amount of usefulness as far as backing. Yeah, you can make strings out of it, but backing artificial sinew to chemically change it or chemically bond it, because it's not just a physical bond, it's also, I believe, a chemical bond, whatever. Let's not get tripped up into that. Artificial sinew wouldn't really bond too well. You might as well go with real sinew. Now, the real sinew question. He mentioned Korean bows. Now, real sinew has the ability to stretch a certain percentage of its natural length before failing, before breaking. On a bow like this, with this amount of reflex, which it's Emilio, yeah, I've been taking forever to get this thing out, but because of its reflex nature, I need to really make sure it's fully cured before I release it, because the tillering can change if it's uncured because of the reflexed nature. Anyway, where was I going with that? This is not one of those highly reflexed Korean bows with the horn bellies. The tips don't meet, when it's unstrung. Real sinew will be able to stretch enough so it doesn't break on a bow that's that highly reflexed. However, I would strongly suggest using backstrap sinew, so on each limb it's a full length. So you can take advantage of the full stretching of the sinew without it like pulling apart or shearing or breaking at the joints, because you can see these leg tendons aren't long enough to reach, so there are going to be junctions. If you're making the horn bow where the sayas are going to be meeting, there's so much stretch taking place in that you really should spend the effort to get, or the cost, not the effort. You should go with the cost of backstrap sinew. It's usually more expensive, but it's a lot easier to prepare. Instead of pounding and stripping and making your fingers sore with the smaller leg tendons, because you have to pull them apart with your hands, backstrap sinew, I would take it, put it over a rough edge, get rid of the sheathing, and then comb it out with a brush that I made out of a block of wood, and then I cut nails, the heads off of them, small nails, sharpened them, and then drove them into that block. So you just take your backstrap sinew and just comb it, and you prepare it. There's no pounding, there's no sore fingers pulling it apart, and plus it's longer. It's more expensive, but it's so much easier to work. If you live in a country where they eat meat, you have access to sinew through butchers, whatever. That sinew doesn't need to be white-tailed deer. I like white-tailed deer, but it can be water buffalo. It could be ostrich. Believe it or not, people back bows with ostrich tendons. It could be goat. It could be sheep. It could be anything that has tendons. And so instead of trying to make things easier in the beginning by using something such as artificial sinew or something that isn't going to work as well, glue as well, function as well, spend the extra effort if you're going to make a reproduction to use the real material. It's not going to be that difficult to find raw tendons. Now, I don't know if you can mail dried tendons cross-country. It might not pass customs because it's an unprepared material, but you may find that you can send strip tendons because they don't look like animal products. I would never suggest that anybody tried to fool customs, because that's bad. Don't try to fool customs. Follow the law. You heard it here first. But it might be possible that if you mistakenly tried to ship prepared tendons, it might pass customs. No guarantees, and I'm not going to attempt it. The next thing is, there was a mention of epoxy. Epoxy can dry brittle. There are certain epoxies that aren't brittle, but if you're trying to use rawhide, I'm going to skip from sinew to rawhide, and coat it with something that's not flexible, you could run into problems. This was a light paddle bow, about 40 pounds. It was rawhide backed, which my paddle bows are durable unbacked. Adding rawhide makes them more durable. And so when this rawhide backed paddle bow of only about 40 pounds just cracked the first time I did it and broke cleanly in half, I knew there was an issue. And that issue was, I experimented with an epoxy finish. I went one step beyond that and mixed it with acetone. You can take epoxy, mix it with acetone, and make a very thin wash that penetrates. Well, what that epoxy did, it soaked into that rawhide, and it killed the ability of rawhide to stretch. It turned it into a brittle substance, and the bow just cracked in half. So be careful with epoxies. Now I'm going to go off on a tangent. I discovered, thank you to Mikey Yancey of Pine Hollow Longbows, a Minwax product called the Ultimate Floor Finish that works well over sinew, rawhide, bare wood. But anyway, it is an ultimate floor finish. It should be called the Ultimate Bow Finish because it is a water-based polyurethane that stays flexible. It's not going to give you any problems as far as the surface cracking because it becomes brittle. Because it is not a natural substance, such as boiled linseed oil, you're not going to have problems with mold developing. Boiled linseed oil can develop mold problems because it's an organic substance, and mold and stuff likes to eat it. Maybe mice would like to eat it too. If you were to use a non-water-based poly, it can harden. Oil-based finishes over time can harden and become brittle, whereas the ultimate floor finish doesn't. What else should I cover with this? Flax was mentioned, flax fibers, which is a proven method for backing bows. I've never done that, but it works. It would work on something that's possibly this reflex. However, with a longer or a more severe reflex, I probably would say if you're going to do a reproduction, use the real materials. I'm not sure if flax has enough stretch before it breaks to even carry that highly reflex bow like a Korean bow or the other ones where the side is crossed into even bracing, because the more reflex it is, the more stretching takes place just up to bracing. I would definitely, with a reproduction bow, use the materials that were developed and evolved for that bow. If it's less reflexed or just even flat, no recurves, flax, experiment with stuff, that's fine. But taking a bow that bends, back upon itself like an authentic Korean bow, backstraps in you, especially if it's going to be horn-backed, which it should be horn-backed if I say F instead of F, it's going to be, an actual reproduction. Anyway, I hope that answers some questions. Yes, Emilio, I am working on your bow. I'm just taking it very slowly because of the reflex and the recurves. I want to make sure that it's going to stay balanced for you, so it does take some time. I tillered it. It's a beautiful springy little bow. Work the tips down. Now all I'd have to do is do some sinewying on the tips, shape the tips, and do final tillering. And then snakeskin back it. Alright, have a great day, and I hope you're all staying warm and dry. Peace out!